Hey everyone, how are you doing? So I'm here today with Daniel Barber. He's a great friend of mine and also a very talented VP of Sales and VP of Revenue. I will let him explain, but basically we are here to do an extension of the Sales and Marketing Jam to deep dive a little bit further into sales for the next sort of 45 minutes or so. So I run the Kiwi landing pad, if you don't know that. I guess a few housekeeping things. So if you're having video or audio issues, switch to Chrome. It's the best browser to use with Crowdcast. Make sure that you're plugged in power. Your video quality will be much better. We're both in San Francisco, so hopefully our video is nice and clear. We've got good internet here. And you'll see at the bottom there is a section for questions. So write any of the questions, upvote your questions or upvote other people's questions if you really want it answered. And additionally, use the right-hand column to connect with your peers. So I'm your moderator, but Daniel's going to sort of riff on, your sales process is not your strategy for a while. Thanks, Ralph. And I guess welcome back to some of you who are joining us for the third time this week. This is the third webinar we've done. The first one was Kiwi Founder Stories with JD Trask. Yesterday we had Tammy McQueen on, and she did a bit of a marketing chat and how to build a content machine. And so today it's all about sales. So I guess we're going to try to just answer your questions. So ask as many questions as you can. Awesome. Okay, over to you, Daniel.
Yeah, so thanks, Sian. I appreciate everyone tuning in. I know it looks like we have a few folks coming in from the Southern Hemisphere. I also have some allegiances to all things South. I grew up in Australia, in Adelaide, actually. If you've ever had Australian wine, it's probably come from Adelaide. Had my youth there, and then moved over to the US, what seems like an eternity, and I'm going to age myself, but back in 2004, almost 2005. Went to university in the US for some time, and then moved to the Netherlands for a year. Went to university there, moved to Germany for 6 months, and then moved back to the US, graduated, and moved to Japan. Did my MBA there for 2 years and started working for a Japanese company. And they were gracious enough to have me run the Canadian operations for some time. So I moved out to Vancouver, ran what they considered a test market, which was a $2 million business annually. And so I got some really sort of grassroots experience around what does go-to-market look like, and how do you how do you acquire new companies? How do you acquire channel partnerships? What does that look like? Revenue in general. And then moved back to Japan from Vancouver. And then they sort of sent me out to the big leagues, otherwise known as the country to the south. And I ran a $110 million business for a Japanese company. So for them, out of San Francisco. So, serendipitously, I didn't last long with the Japanese company. I was too attracted to companies that were in this tech space back in 2012, and moved to a company called Responsus, and joined as an individual contributor there. Sort of proved myself pretty quickly in 6 months, started managing the team, and joined at about 80 million in revenue. So very different from the 2 million in Canada, and very different from the $110 million business I was running out of San Francisco for the Japanese company. Joined at 80. As I left, I had roughly 34 people across 5 different offices. So I opened up an office in Japan, opened up an office in Melbourne. The business was doing about 200 million, just north of 200 million as I left. We were acquired by Oracle the end of 2013 for 1.5 billion. And simultaneously, I joined as an advisor to a small company called ToutApp. And so ToutApp were solving a problem around email marketing for sales, doing almost no revenue at this stage. So very, very small. I joined as an advisor at employee number 2. And so simultaneously, while working at Responsus, I sort of assessed the opportunity of ToutApp and joined officially in April of 2014. And At that time, we were doing just under about a million. I helped raise a Series A. So the company that invested in Responsus through the Series A also invested in ToutApp, at the close of 2013. Grew revenue 3x through my time in 2014.
What does ToutApp do, Daniel?
Yeah. So serving up email tracking templates and analytics for salespeople. So helping salespeople close more deals. Definitely pretty familiar with the sales space, courtesy of that experience through ToutApp. Probably had around 200 conversations with VPs of sales like myself, looking at their problems. How do they establish markets? How do they establish a go-to-market? What does that look like? What does it even mean? And raised the $15 million round through Andreessen Horowitz at the end of, going into 2015. And then, serendipitously sort of identified a problem which I think many may have tuned in today to try to solve. But I observed across almost every organization trying to sell anything. And that is, in reality, you're actually just trying to find your next customer. And so that problem is not really effectively solved today. And that's the problem that we're actually solving at Node. Definitely through my time through San Francisco, I've had a lot of conversations with VPs of sales because I've sold to the VP of sales for the last, call it 2 years. And prior to that, selling to the VP of marketing. So sort of excited to share today what this topic means around sales strategy and why it's fundamentally different to sales process and why a lot of folks actually get that very confused. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I think be sure to ask your questions. We've got a few more people who have joined us. Brett has asked a first question. He's really interested in the definition of strategy, the difference between GTM, business model, etc. as you see it. Do you want to start there?
Yeah. Let's start there. That's completely in line with the agenda, so I love it. I think when we think about strategy and we're thinking about go-to-market, what I would think about as the go-to-market is, as you're looking at, a potential business, you've got a product of sorts. You may not have product market fit, right? And what do I mean by product market fit? If you haven't read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, I would strongly encourage that you do. That's a book that is a great starting point for if you're looking at an early stage product and you're not sure how to look at a product. I would also encourage you to read Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm. Great book, gives a good sense of what a market can look like and how a product evolves over the lifetime of being in a market. So when you think about your go-to-market, you have to think about, is this a model where we want to sell direct to a business? Do we want to sell direct to a consumer? Do we want to sell indirect through a channel, right? So there are many methods of distribution. And so really sales is just distribution. It doesn't matter if it's sales from a B2B standpoint or B2C standpoint or indirect. It's really just distribution. That's what sales is at its very core. I definitely encourage folks to think about it through that lens, which means as you think about your go-to-market, let's say as an example, it's direct sales. If you're selling a direct sales model, then that means you need to hire these people called salespeople. And so in doing that, you need to think about a lot of different things. The go-to-market is closely connected to your business model. And why I say that is because you need to think about what would the potential cost of this product be? How much could I actually sell that for? And so, that's the derived value. And so, you want to think about evaluating how much you could derive in value for your product through, customer sort of feedback sessions. So speaking to people who are perhaps have a problem that you think you're solving and evaluate how much they'd be willing to pay for that problem. this is really the crux of what a go-to-market is. So understanding, all right, I think I could sell direct to a business. I don't think I need a channel. Selling a direct to a business, then that ties into how do I want to structure my business model? So do I want to structure it to where every user pays X amount to use this service? Or do I want to use a model that's based on usage? So by usage, I mean there's many different ways usage can be described. But broadly speaking, it's if it's a widget, I buy 6 widgets, it costs $100. I buy 12 widgets, it costs, fractionally less than $200 because presumably there's a sliding scale of if you buy more, you pay slightly less. That's usage, right? And so many people get confused around usage, especially in areas like email marketing, where you look at Marketo as an example. They may charge for a set database, meaning if you have 20,000 people you would like to send an email to, they will charge you X amount. If you have 40,000, then they charge you slightly less than 2X. That's usage. So that's a usage model, and there are advantages and disadvantages of every model. So those are 2 models. One is per user, one is usage. One is rev share, right? Meaning, all right, so if if you use my product and make a sale, then, or if you can increase your revenue of your business by X, I want to take a portion of that. That's another option. And then there's basically a flat model, which means that you charge a flat amount to use your product or service, and there's really no additional costs to use the product. It's an all-you-can-eat. This is quite common in non-subscription businesses where you sell a particular widget. When they've used the potential widget or they continue to use it for X amount of time, then they come back and buy another one. That time period is not necessarily determined, but there are companies that will model on a flat model in a subscription business. So you use the service for the course of a year, and then over the course of the year you come back and purchase again as you go to renewal. So really it's a matrix, and I'm tempted to use this whiteboard that's the wall behind me. But you have essentially 4 options. You have usage. You can
use the whiteboard if you want.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. As long as it's purple. So you have.
You might need to adjust
usage. Okay. This is going to be hard.
You
have usage. You have a seat or a user. You have rev share. And then you have a flat model. And so those are essentially the 4 types of businesses that generally operate within tech companies. And you need to evaluate really. So this is not done in terms of, it'll vary based on your business, but there's basically adoption and revenue. So adoption meaning how much, this is not necessarily on this side, it's just an example, but there's adoption and there's revenue, meaning what model will encourage a set of users to use your product more, that's adoption, and what model will drive more revenue for your business, that's the revenue. So an example that many of you on this sort of podcast webinar will be familiar with would be Slack. They have a per user model. For them, every user, they could charge them X. And so every user they get on board, they can charge X. Now, as more users jump on board, they need to somehow drive more adoption. So for them, they've got to figure out how do they get engagement, meaning having channels and having less methods to turn off notifications is their desired goal, because if people adopt the product, then more people use the product, meaning more seats sold. That's a simple way, in terms of how a business model is set up. So that's the business model component. And that ties, as you can probably imagine, very closely to the go-to-market, because once you decide if you're selling direct to a business, direct to a consumer, or indirect, that will have direct implications for how your business model is set up. So I would describe that as the sales strategy rather than how many salespeople do I need? How do I hire salespeople? What goals do I set for the salesperson? How many meetings should I set up? How many emails should I send? When should I send the emails? That's all sales process, which we're absolutely going to touch on today and is equally interesting. And I love getting very tactical there, but it's very important to understand the difference between the two, because people will loosely use the term sales strategy when defining how many salespeople they have or what are the quotas of those salespeople. That has nothing to do with sales strategy. That's sales process.
Brett, did we answer your question? You let us know in the comments. And follow-up question from Brett. He says, what did the go-to-market slides look like in your last company's pitch deck?
That's a great question. So there's a recent book called Get Backed, 2 words, by HBR. It came out in January of this year. It's an amazing book. It has about 25 different companies and their pitch decks. I recently had 4 Cambridge MBAs work with us at Node for a summer. So they came out during March and stayed with us. I feel bad to say this, but in our basement. And they worked on some amazing projects, including our pitch deck. And so one of the projects I gave them was to read this book and come up with a pitch deck. There are a couple of other really great pitch decks. So Reid Hoffman's pitch deck that he used for LinkedIn. So if you search Reid Hoffman pitch deck Series B, that was for Greylock Partners. He now works at Greylock Partners. So it's pretty old, as you can imagine, because it was for Series B for LinkedIn, who's now a public company. Another one is for Mixpanel's Series B by Suhail. Definitely check that out. Similar kind of thing, really good pitch deck. But honestly, I would say the 25 or so in Get Backed set the stage for a very good foundation around how you think about your go-to-market. For ToutApp, so to answer your question directly, Brett, we used a user model. So we charged, at the time when I joined, I want to say $49. By the time I left, we were charging $79. So we derived more value through the product over the course of time, and that led to a higher average contract value, which was beautiful. And we were able to charge more money. But we were a seat model. And so there are limitations with that, meaning every organization is going to evaluate your product in terms of how much value it can give to one particular area of the business and then another particular area of the business. And so the downside of the seat model is that each functional area, whether it's sales, marketing, customer success, and so on, they're going to evaluate the product based on the features that drive that particular functional area and determine whether there's enough value for them to spend the $79. That's painful for organizations to do because it means each functional team head has to evaluate whether this is a thing or not. So there's advantages, but there's definite disadvantages from a standpoint of we sometimes wouldn't sell into a particular team. So there'd be the account executive team would be using ToutApp, and then the sales development team wouldn't be using ToutApp, and same sort of thing, vice versa.
Awesome, good answer. Let us know if we answered your question. My next question answered
please.
too, a bit indirectly, but the resource is great. Thanks, Brett. Okay,
cool.
So next, definition of process, hiring, stages, and scaling. A few more people joining us. Guys, keep your questions coming down in the comments so that we can get through some of those. We have quite a small group, so we can be pretty specific, and Daniel likes to get tactical.
Yes. So sales process is definitely something, another question, could you also run through the advantage and disadvantage of any other models? Yes. So why don't we just touch on that quickly? If you're, I'll try to go through it quickly.
That's fine.
Yep, and then we'll go into sales process. So just the advantages and disadvantages. So if we think about a usage model, right? Usage models are great from a standpoint of Use the product, pay X, right? Use it more, pay slightly less than 2X. The only downside is that you actually are charging your users to use the product. That may sound logical, but it actually hurts adoption significantly, because think about it from a standpoint of, you want the user to use the product and you want them to use it a lot. In fact, actually, you want them to advocate for the product to every single person that they speak to, right? Because the cheapest form of marketing is customer advocacy. There are companies that are sprouting up all over the place just to encourage customer advocacy. You don't really need the solution to do that if you set your business model up correctly, because your users should be the biggest advocates. So the downside to the usage model is that you're charging the users to use the product, so they won't use the product. They may drive more value from using it, but they have to pay each time. Most people inherently don't want to pay for something every single time. So you're essentially nickeling and diming your customer, which is pretty annoying. But it has its advantages. It's easy to use. It's easy to set up, right? They eat 8 slices of pizza, they pay X. They eat more, they pay more. It's very logical, but it's generally doesn't encourage adoption. The rev share model is very attractive from a standpoint of you can make a lot of money. So Google, as an example, they did revenue share back in the early days. And, so every time they would get attribution for a product, they would charge their companies. But the thing with that is that it's very hard to track. So if you've got a really good accountant who counts beans very effectively, that's great. If you don't, then it's going to be really hard to manage how much money comes in. But at the right time in a business, maybe when you have an established set of customers and you're driving a lot of value from your customers, you should have that conversation with them directly and maybe expose the idea of, hey, if we brought in $1 million for you, like, could we charge you? Would you be comfortable paying 100,000, like 10% of that? So that's advantage and disadvantage of rev share. Flat model, huge advantage for the customer, easy to buy. Huge advantage from adoption, easy to use. Can be a downside for you if you've got ongoing costs, because you've only charged them one amount. So you've got to be confident about your costs before you do that. If you're not, then that can hurt you. But easy to buy, easy to sell. The person knows exactly how much they're charging. You know exactly how much you can make. You can forecast your earnings. You can forecast how many salespeople you need to hire. There are a lot of advantages to knowing exactly how much you charge. So hopefully that answered your question. But ping me if not. I'm happy to chat offline too.
Awesome.
Cool. So if no one has any objections, we're going to go into the tactical weeds world of sales process, which I love. A few of the topics that were collected around hiring, scaling, which are some ambiguous terms, but hiring is definitely not, and setting up international operations. How does sales work in the US? Things of this nature. We can touch on a few. I think one area that I would spend time on, there's a deck by a VC named Matrix Partners. So David Scott has a deck that is named Outbound Prospecting. It's in SlideShare. So if you search Matrix Partners Outbound Prospecting, it's a SlideShare. It's about 50 slides. On about the 4th slide or so from memory, he describes the specialization of sales. So these terms are often thrown around of sales development and inbound and outbound and account executive. And these things are very hard to understand if you're an early stage company. Where do I spend my money? Don't get confused. Use the doc, take the guidance. There are 3 roles. One's inbound, one's outbound, and one's closing. Exactly. That's the slides. Thank you. So they're pretty simple. In the early stages, you can't afford all 3. So hire someone that closes deals. That's your first hire. You don't hire someone to set up meetings, because you should be able to have someone that does that as well as your first hire. if you've got an enormous amount of inbound, so people are coming to your website and hitting your website and they are great companies and there's just money raining from the sky, that's amazing. Please shoot me an email. I'll come join the company. But while you do that, probably want to hire someone to manage your inbound. Get that person. That person would be what I would describe as a market development rep. That person manages the inbound channel and determines what is qualified and what is not, and passes those conversations to the closing individual. Is that the first person you hire? No. If there are any founders or CEOs, perhaps if you can close deals and you want to be the first salesperson, which is probably not a bad idea because you need to be able to convey value as the CEO or founder. And so it's probably a good idea to at least close a couple deals yourself. But moving beyond that, you need someone to close the deals. So I would advocate for hiring a closing person first before hiring anyone else. If you've got an enormous amount of inbound traffic and it's good, then bring in a person to qualify that traffic and direct it, if you will, through a traffic lane to a closing person. If you are unlucky enough, or pretty much the norm, and don't have money coming from the sky or through your website, then you probably need to contact companies. And at all stages, companies need to contact other companies. There's a common trend and an unfortunate one in San Francisco that people get very comfortable with money coming from the sky, i.e. companies that have a high amount of inbound. Don't wait before doing outbound. If you've got a significant amount of revenue coming in, it's good, things seem to be humming, that is the time to invest in hiring someone who can find more companies, customers for you. So a hunter or a prospector, as David articulates in the slide share. And you need to define who those companies are so that you can try to find lots of them and have conversations with them. That means you need to define really a ideal customer profile, which I've talked about quite a lot on a few different podcasts. But defining a customer profile can happen for your first customer, but also for later customers as you start to learn more around the type of company that is attractive and derives value from your product. So that's kind of what I would say at the early start of sales process and establishing the first few hires. How to do that involves generally building out also an ideal candidate profile. And so I've written about this topic over the course of probably the last 2.5, 3 years. I've had north of 1,500 to sort of 1,700 interviews. And I wrote a post on Salesforce. If you get a chance, take a look at it. It's what I've learned from 1,000 interviews. And what I can tell you is that I would treat hiring in the exact same way that you treat qualification of leads in the sales front, right? From a standpoint of the best person is not necessarily the first person that you speak to. And Greylock Partners have a wonderful post. It's actually how they supported Facebook as Facebook grew their business. So if you search Greylock Partners, Facebook recruiting, the 100 rule, I talk about it in the post on Salesforce as well, but it essentially implies that you need to generally look at LinkedIn, around 100 LinkedIn profiles or 100 resumes to find 15 people to meet with, to find one good candidate, and to find one person that you want to work at your company. If you apply that type of rigor, you'll find really good people. Anytime that you slip from that, and especially in the early hires, you'll find someone that, is just mediocre, which as early stage businesses, you can't afford to do that. I want to pause there for a minute, John, just if people do have questions on the hiring aspect or just in relation to the process piece, I want to be conscious of time and make sure we have some of those answered as well.
So I think your first hiring related question is, how can you identify a good sales closer if you are looking for your first hire, e.g. their numbers might just be from working in a high volume business?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So I would think about when you're looking at hiring sales reps, there is a level of sophistication in the product you're trying to sell. And that will determine on the value, so the dollar value associated by how much it costs, right? So if a business has to make $1 million decision to buy a service or a product and service, $1 million requires 15, 20 people to sign off, right? It's just, I've never been in a business, and I hope to never be in a business where one person will sign off for $1 million and then a whole host of other people will execute on that product or service that was purchased for $1 million. If that ever happens, run from that company. So, therefore, if there's 10 or 15 people involved, there's a lot of complexity to that. So having and managing 10 to 15 people in a conversation is quite difficult. And so that level of complexity, you need to evaluate where your product is. So if you're selling a $2,000 widget, that's fine. But that would be sort of described as a transactional sale on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So you've got a complex sale, meaning something like $1 million or even $100,000, where you might deal with 5 or 10 people. At $2,000, you might be calling a restaurant owner and you're selling them a payment system so that they can process delivery orders, right? That, if it's $1,000, doesn't require 10 people. That requires the restaurant owners to say, yes, I want this thing. That I want this thing conversation, the more of those you can have, the better. So the faster you can get to a yes or a no, and I would actually say it's the faster you can get to a no, transactional sellers don't necessarily work well in complex environments, and vice versa. So evaluate your first hire very, very carefully on what does their experience look like. Have they sold $100,000 complex things that take 6 months, many people involved, lots of hoops, lots of IT, lots of legal? Is that what they've been doing? Because if so, then, and you're selling a product that's of similar cost, then that makes sense. If they've been selling $2,000, take them off the shelf, items, then you're selling those, then that's great. But if you're not, then don't hire that person, because they're very comfortable with a high volume, sort of like a large number of things that have to happen. They're not comfortable where they've got to deal with complex scenarios that require, lots of negotiation, lots of, I would kind of describe it as pushing a cat into a cage. And in the case of, enterprise sales, many cats into a cage. Did that answer the question?
Outstanding
cool.
advice.
That was
awesome. Next question is from Paul. Hi, Paul. They're currently working on a large prospect. The original contact that reached out to us is sold, and the things were moving forward. Now the IT director wants the school to evaluate how they're using an existing product that they heavily invested into. What would you normally do in an enterprise sale where there's been an internal sale made before we can get a chance, i.e. Xero has a lean process map where they will pinpoint the inefficiencies in their current process?
Yeah, so if I understand correctly, I just want to make sure I understand that. So they've already purchased an existing product or service, and your product or service is coming in and replacing that. Is that?
He said yes.
That correct? Yeah, good. Just want to make sure I clarify. So the thing when you're talking about enterprise is you need to be differentiated, right? So, there's kind of, this is a horrible butchering of my MBA program in Japan, but there's kind of 2 strategies really in business. There's cost leadership. This is Michael Porter 101. And then there's differentiated. And so differentiated implying, you have to show that you can do something differently. And so for enterprise, you're 100% not doing cost leadership, right? If you just try to approach the scenario, well, we'll cut the price so that it's not so much of a difference for you guys. That's not going to work. So my advice would be understand who are the advocates that are advocating for the existing solution. What often happens in enterprise is that you're not actually engaging with everyone in the room. They may be in the room in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense, there's conversations you're not involved in. And there's people that are probably advocating for this thing that you don't even have conversations with and haven't spoken to. So unfortunately, what happens with enterprise is you have to surface where those conversations are and who was the advocate that perhaps pushed for this existing thing to be purchased. And just understand, so partly, where the pains are, right? Because probably they have some pains, but they don't want to acknowledge them. And find out how many people actually advocate for this thing. So to do that, you need to have someone that's a trusted advisor. That doesn't necessarily, and that often gets confused with sort of like a decision maker. Those are horrible distinctions. They're not. Guess what? No, there's no decision maker for $100,000. There's lots of people making a decision. There's someone that signs the check. But understand or have someone that you can talk to that will give you insight into the decision-making process, and understand who else is pushing for this prior solution, who else is restricting you replacing that, and then also work out the best way possible to describe the differentiated value that you provide over this existing thing. Because it's not cost, right? It's never cost. If you're doing $100,000 something, it's not cost. You drop it $1,000, they don't care.
So Paul also followed up and said that they have a service that doesn't do what we do, but they want to try and find out how they can mutate that into doing what they do. And he said that they don't care about the cost.
Yes, which they wouldn't. So they have a product or service that does do what you do. Does not.
Yeah.
And so the other, you're trying to replicate that service, or they're trying to replicate you?
They're trying to basically make that existing product fit what Paul does. Right. Because they've obviously already swallowed that
invested. Cost. Yeah. It's a little bit of an unusual scenario, but I would say that you could try to beat it down and say, you should not go with this service because it can't be done, and so on and so on and so on. I would actually take it a different approach and just try to share ways that you've helped other companies with the same type of scenario. There's a common misconception in companies, the sort of build it attitude or make it work. But in reality, if you are really solving a problem, there's no way they're going to be able to do that effectively, and not to the same extent that you are, because your business is built around, like I assume, entirely built around solving this problem. So presumably there are other companies that you've helped solve this type of problem. And so this might be a scenario where you need to pull out that sort of king card or ace card and say, hey, do you want to talk to another company that considered, if you have one of these types of customers, considered building it themselves or trying to mash a square plug into a round hole, and probably didn't work. So getting some customer testimonial and getting someone to sort of explain to them, not as directly as you can, often will help and relieve some of the direct pressure of you trying to punish the fact that there's no way their mashing of this service can solve the problem you're solving. Does that help, Paul?
Yep.
Cool.
I feel like Dave has a follow-up question to this question, which was, in a SaaS situation with the mid-level customers, how do you handle maintaining engagement with customer contacts when there is customer staff turnover without having to resell to the new people?
So I'm going to bite my tongue extremely hard and not mention anything about Node, because this is actually a problem that we solve. I'm going to describe how that could be done. the thing with mid-market is that, you know, the enterprise, if you will, right? So whether it's New Zealand or it's Australia or it's the US or it's Japan, it's a pretty defined market. You just go to the stock exchange and look at all the public companies. It's not difficult. The thing that gets messy is mid-market. Mid-market, there's thousands of companies. You don't know all of them. You can't track where the people go. It gets really messy trying to figure out, okay, so this person went here and then they went here. And so, you know, you've got a product that it was working and then, you know, your huge champion left and they go somewhere else. That's really hard to track. You need to track those people because they go to other companies and then you can sell to them there. The downside is that I would like to advocate for a service that does it. I can't. I don't know one other than our own. So it's incredibly challenging. It hurts the customer success organization because the likelihood you'll get a renewal in a mid-market type of business will drop significantly when you lose your champions and you lose your people who are using your product. How do you re-engage them? You have to ensure that you have regular value moments for every user that comes on board. So I had I was sort of fortunate enough to become friends with Alison Pickens from Gainsight, who runs customer success at the Customer Success Company. So her and I have had a few conversations on this topic, and she was kind enough to come in and advise sort of the Node team on how she thinks about customer success. And this value moment she shared with me is, you know, you need to find what those value moments are for users, and you need to create them as quick as possible. So that means you need to probably set up some trigger of every time there's a new person using your product, and make sure you give them the most amazing experience possible. But that doesn't mean end to end. That means finding a value moment as quick as you can. And value meaning value for them, not for you. And then when you do that, that results in them continuing to use your product. So defining those value moments is really important, and then trying to ensure that every user or every operator of your thing gets to that moment as fast as possible. So that was my best attempt at not selling Node. So hopefully I did okay.
Good job. Let us know, David. Okay. Next question from Ralph. With the SaaS model, I believe we should see a shift from a simple closing deal, a one-off, to a more sustainable retention-oriented model, right? So how should a sales team work together, e.g. with the customer success team, and who should be in charge of what, like the new customers, renewal, cross-sell, and upsell?
Yeah, so in San Francisco, there was a conference last week, or maybe it's even the week before now, for a Gainsight they had in Oakland. And so huge thing. Lots of focus on customer success. I love customer success. I lead the team, which consists of a growing two here at Node. But I think it's an area that's often misunderstood from a standpoint of it was in its early days confused as account management. That just sounds horrible. I don't want to manage accounts. I don't want to be managed by someone else. If someone's an account manager, does that mean that they're managing me? I don't want to be managed. Not from a standpoint of how I use their product. I want them to help me be successful. So that may sound simple, but it means understanding the role of the person that you're selling to. And so that may mean bringing in customer success before the deals are done. So we do that at Node. I advocate every company to do that, meaning that contextual information that's shared before someone becomes a customer is far more valuable for the customer success person than it is the account executive. Because the account executive, for all intents and purposes, is trying to get the new deal done. Yes, there's advantages to getting an upsell or a cross-sell, but you know what? Like every account executive, if they're really a good one, is probably want to bring in more customers, right? That's what they love, solving that problem. The best ones I've seen. And so, you know, the optimal route is let them do that. but bring in the customer success person long before the deal is done, because the more contextual information that they can get into what these individuals care about and what their objectives are for the business, the higher likelihood that they'll actually drive the right metrics and actually drive the value that you've committed in the sales process to achieve. So that would mean that, as the year-long engagement or 2-year engagement goes through, then there's the question, who runs the renewal? So to answer that question directly, I would say, think about who is actually good at sales, right? Who is good at closing deals? Is it someone who's driving to make the customer successful? If you are putting that person in charge of closing the deal, you're actually putting them in a situation that's biased, and they have a conflict of interest. They're trying to make the person successful while also trying to make money. That's not good. So the model for customer success is evolving, but I'm seeing, at least in the market, and definitely what we're going to do here at Node, a model where customer success is driving one thing, that's the success of the business through the utilization of your product or service, and sales keeps the relationship and closes the deal. That's how I would advocate for it. Hopefully that answered the question.
Awesome, good answer. I guess a lot of, when Ash was back in New Zealand, he sort of recommended hiring in pairs. Would you follow the same logic? And why is that a good thing to do when you're building out your sales functions? So
Ash is a good friend of mine. We've been friends since he was working early days at Optimizely. Optimizely was an early adopter, if you will, of ToutApp, also an Andreessen Horowitz-backed company. Done a lot of hiring, hired maybe 50, 60 people now. Wouldn't hire in pairs. Tested it. There will be a large number of advocates that will go for this model. A large number of people would argue that hiring in pairs means that people can learn together. Well, here's the downside with the pairing model. And so there's a great book by Alex Pentland. Now I'm going to butcher the title, but I believe it's Learning. I'd have to look it up. This is bad. This is a moment that I forget the title, but Alex Pentland, related to learning. And he describes the way people learn, and more importantly, the way people process information. And so what I think about when I bring someone on is, how can we create the most conducive environment for this person to be successful, but also so that they can teach others, because through teaching, you're actually learning, right?
Is it Honest Signals?
Sorry?
Is it Honest Signals?
Nope, it's another one.
Oh.
Alex Pentland. I could look it up, but I'm not going to put my head really close to the screen. So what I would say is, what he describes in the book is that, so let's think about a scenario. You're a hiring manager. You're going to bring on your first 2 people. Great. So you got 2 people. They join on Monday. Great. You go through the onboarding materials. Great. One of the individuals has a question about the onboarding materials. Great. They ask their friend sitting next to them, hey, Sam, do you know the answer to this? No, I don't know either. Great. Who do they ask? The bottleneck, you. Is that optimal? Not really, right? There's no teaching that goes on between person A and person B. What's actually optimal is when you hire in a staggered formation. And the reason why he describes this is because if you think about staggered, you've essentially got one person who starts, let's say, on Monday, and then the next person starts the following Monday. So first person on Monday gets all the onboarding materials, learns those. Great. Doesn't learn everything, right? Because we don't retain everything. And then the next person on the following Monday, they go through the same thing. They don't absorb everything, right? And they have a question. And so who is the first person they should ask? They should ask the person that started the following Monday, because that person may know, because they also went through it. And they're a little bit further along. What that does is actually reduce you to being the bottleneck, but it also means that there's collaboration that happens between person A and person B. It also means that person A is trying to teach person B, which means that reinforces anything that they did learn, and anything they didn't learn, and both of them didn't learn, then you probably need to adjust your learning schedule. He talks about and advocates for not hiring in pairs, and I've tested both at scale. So like hiring 3 people at one time and then hiring 1, 2, 3, 4. Sequencing is, and staggered, if you will, is definitely optimal based on my own experience, but I'm certainly open to being convinced otherwise. Awesome. Yes, exactly, Tim. See one, do one, teach one. Yep. It works.
I just want to flick where I'm conscious of time. So I guess the last thing on the agenda was examples for local and international markets. So did you want to touch on that?
Yeah. So, running a business in Canada, there's surprisingly actually people up there, and, there's business. And then, how it translates to the US market, I can share a little bit there, and then how it translates to perhaps like Asian markets and US markets. Most markets are actually the same in the way they operate. It's funny how that works, but the size of the market may be smaller, but you still need to think about, am I selling a complex product, a simple product? What is my business model? Is it per user? Is it usage? Is it rev share? Is it flat? So those things stay the same. The only difference is how competitive is the market from a standpoint of, in Canada, you can find pretty good engineers pretty cheap. In San Francisco, you can't, because Facebook and Google down the street are usually hiring them. So what differs per market is the talent. So the way I would think about opening up markets, especially in countries, is you need to be as close as possible to your talent market. Products don't build businesses, people do, right? People build products. So therefore, if you need to hire engineers, well, set up your shop right next to the university where they graduate. And when they do their walk down their street with the coat on, then you hire them, or even earlier. People have figured that out, right? So, work out where your talent pool comes from and then place yourself as close as you can to that place. And that will help in a significant way from a standpoint of reducing your costs of hiring, which in the early stages, it's enormous, right? I'm interviewing 2 to 3 people a day right now, even 4. And I've got stages in businesses where I've interviewed 10 in a day. It's painful. You need to be able to get as close as you can to the people center. So think about your location of where you set up based on that. And then also work out who's competing for your talent, right? So, in the case of, the people in the South Bay who are close to Stanford, do you think there's a reason why they're close to Stanford? Yes, because Stanford graduates top engineers, top people in business, top people in most functions. It's the same for any organization. So if there are large organizations competing for that talent, maybe you don't set up there. So in the case of, let's say in the US, there's universities in Arizona that graduate people with good degrees, and those folks want to go into sales. And a large number of people graduate there. So a company like Zenefits, they needed salespeople. So what did they do? They went to the closest place where they could hire salespeople, and they hired them all. So if you're trying to compete with Zenefits, good luck with that. So think about also who's competing for your talent. And, I think geographically also think about how you get that talent, right? Is it through recruiters? Is it direct? Do you need a network? The other stuff stays the same. So the business model, the go-to-market will change slightly, but not really. It's really how do you get the people in the door that are going to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. So I would say the one difference that I've noticed, setting up business in Canada, working in business in Japan and setting up a business in Japan, setting up a business here in the US, working in now another small business, we'll do international as well. Most things stay the same. People don't. Hopefully that was helpful in the last few minutes that we had.
Super helpful. Okay, I'm gonna come back now. Hello. So yeah, awesome. Great session. Thanks so much for coming in and sharing. Very tactical, very great. I really enjoyed it. I hope all of you guys did. If you have any more questions, flick them through to me, and I can most likely get Daniel to ask them when he has some time. And yeah, do you have anything else you want to say, Daniel?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. You know, I love doing these kind of sessions and giving back. If you do have questions, I'll do my best. You can shoot me an email. I'm on this thing called LinkedIn. I have a Twitter handle down the bottom there. It's related to my time in Japan, so if you're confused as to why it has nothing to do with my name, that's why. Yeah, so feel free to reach out. As I said, I'll do my best. I'm at an early stage company too, so I don't sleep much. But I'll do my best to get back to you.
Awesome. And guys, I'm going to send you out a survey so we can keep doing these awesome sessions, which are designed for you, and they're basically what you've asked for based on the feedback that we collect from you. So I guess fill it out so we can keep doing them. Thanks so much for joining. We've got one more session tomorrow, which is all about how you tackle the New Zealand media with a media journalist. So I'll see you then, and thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Ciao.